Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Joe Davish. I'm the director here at the Georgia Center for the Book. On behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book, California Public Library, and Georgia State University Perimeter College campus, welcome to Revival, the Lost Southern Voices. Because it would be a festival of any type. We've had gas leaks, we've had AV issues and whatnot. So yes, introducing and then running back to the booth and running back up there again. So just see where we are recording, not from the booth, but from in front of the booth today because of natural gas leak. However, we will be passing this little microphone stick around. That way you can pick up on the recording.
You should probably clarify that the gas leak is not here.
Yeah, the gas leak's not here. Yes, we will sell it. It was originally supposed to be selling the books today and helping us record. They have a gas leak at their house, not here. If we had a gas leak here, I'd probably be even more frazzled. But just so you all are aware that Revival Lost Southern Voices celebrates historically excluded, erased, or marginalized Southern voices. During this annual festival for readers, they are invited presenters to discuss Southern authors or artists whose works are out of print or otherwise do not receive the attention they deserve. We are also happy to have Harris Books and More, who is now located right down here across from Hammond Scott as the bookseller in the lobby, with all of the books that we've been featuring this weekend from all of the voices. So do stop out there and see them for all of your book buying needs. We are so very proud that they are one of the nation's oldest feminist bookstores and still kicking after 50 years. So thank you to Harris Books and More. So let me quickly introduce our panelists today. They are Brodie Lowe, who is the recipient of the Elizabeth Boatwright Stoker Fellowship in Fiction and the Author Fellowship of Martha Stewart Institute of Creative Writing. He is also a two-time finalist of the Ron Rash Award in Fiction. Oh, and we love Ron Rash. Yes, Ron Rash was here several times. Amazing Southern author in his own right. The stories have appeared in the Broad River Review, Mysteries Review, Eastern Iowa Review, and elsewhere. He has recently completed Reaper of Oz, a prequel to L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, for all of you Oz enthusiasts out there as well. Michael White has published several volumes of William Gates prose. Restored through the William Gate Archive, he worked with a team of William Smith and to create a massive amount of material in the archive for publication. Michael also published 7 books of his own, writings including memoir at his time with William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg called Rota Journals, his journals of travels in Tibet, Peru, and Mexico titled Ports of Entry and Birth of Death, which is an account about visiting Paleolithic art in the caves of southern France, along with 3 books of poetry, The Beyond Within, The Latch, The Confidential Device for the Unconventional, and a novel titled Future of Nothingness Already. And of course, if you saw the William Gate exhibit that we had upstairs, that was part of the William Gate archive. And we also have Jonathan Greene, who earned his Bachelor in Arts and Literature from Bard College and went on to study poetry with Robert Lowell and folklore with Andrew Tundes. The author of more than 20 books, volumes of poetry, Greene as a non-press since 1965. He currently works as a freelance designer in Kentucky and has received many design awards, including honors from the American Association of University Presses, the Chicago Book Clinic, the Midwest Book Show, and the Southern Books Competition. So will you please join me to welcome our panel to discuss Thomas Merton.
Thomas Merton published 29 books in the 27 years from the time he entered the monastery in 1941 until his death in 1968. Of those 29 books, 9 were books of poetry. So he wrote and published poetry from the time he was a college student until the very end of his life, and in the last year of his life, he had 3 new books of poetry ready to go. So as part of his monastic duties, they assigned Merton to teach the new monks who came to the monastery, and he lectured on literary topics and poetry. And his lectures were recorded, and they are available on CDs. And I thought it would be a treat for everyone here to get to hear a little bit of Thomas Merton's voice. So we have an example of Thomas Merton Merton reading one of William Blake's poems, The Fly, and discussing it. We have 3 minutes of audio of Thomas Merton, so we'll start with that.
This, of course, is a very simple little song. Extremely simple. So, many of you will probably just find it so simple that you will despise it. You will contemn it. You will throw things and you will walk out of the room and say, this is disgusting, but I like it. I think it's a nice little song. The Fly. Little fly, thy summer's play, my thoughtless hand has brushed away. Am not I a fly like thee? Art not thou a man like me? For I dance and drink and sing, till some blind hand shall brush my wing. If thought is life and strength and breath, and the want of thought is death, then am I a happy fly, if I live or if I die. Well, now there you got this basic idea, see, of, this is Blake again, this basic idea of identification, you see, brotherhood with all these beings. And of course this isn't pantheistic either, but it's like Buddhism. It's a very Buddhist way of looking at things. See? This idea of Buddhist compassion for all beings. And of course, you will find in Buddhism, actually, the reason for this Buddhist compassion towards all beings, I would say, you could, as a theologian, one could say it's a kind of a relic of the primitive natural revelation to all men. I mean, in these people, they have a kind of a memory, so to speak, of the paradise state in which there was this perfect harmony and fellowship with all beings, and we recover this by compassion, that is, by love. See, so this sense of love for all creatures. The better poets, the deeper and the better the poetry is, it has something of this in it, this love of all God's creation. We may have different forms, it may be tragic and so forth, but basically it's this. Now here's a long poem by Blake. Enter into communication with any other created being because we are all one. Because basically there is a spiritual unity among all creatures since they all tend to God. See? Now, what this means to say then is that this kind of poetry is a poetry which attains its effect not just by making a prose statement of what the poetry says, but by a higher kind of statement of the relationship which it assumes between created beings. See? So that this poem actually creates a realm, a place, an area, a kind of a different level of being, where instead of there being this separation between subject and object, there is a basic unity between all beings. See? And this is fundamental to the deepest kind of poetry.
So that's sort of a primer on mysticism from Thomas Merton. Post-World War II poetry in America took off in wildly experimental directions, and Merton was riding that wave. It was poetry where he stripped words of their past associations and made the words stand out in relationship to one another in ways that bring on new meanings. He put words together such that the traditional meaning of the word did not work, and in the context he placed it. And then you're stuck with this combination of words that doesn't make much sense. And he proposed that that's what creativity is all about. It's about allowing new meanings to arise that hadn't been thought before. And when words are brought together in different ways, something new and strange happens to them. They have unexpected and newly discovered connotations that jump out. And Merton's poetry was designed to provoke that tension. And in one of his lectures to the young monks, he told them, he was reading from his own poetry, and he said, "This material doesn't work in an ordinary way. Here, the sequence of the words is illogical. And as soon as you get a logical sequence, the whole thing is destroyed. It has to be illogical. That's the first thing about it. And the traditional framework of logic is constantly broken down, so you can't be logical even if you try. And then you find yourself exposed to something else, and you don't know what it is. And this has different effects on different types of people, and some people are scared by it. But this breaks through the cramping artificiality of life." So Merton found inspiration for his poetry in modern art. And when Merton looked at a painting by an abstract expressionist like Jackson Pollock, he would ask the question, what's this a painting of? Well, the answer, of course, it's not a painting of anything. It's not representational. So Merton picked up on this in his poetry and wanted to strip words of their meaning and free them from their traditional definitions and let them interact in new ways. He described this as a form of prophecy. He said, to prophesy is not to predict, but to seize upon reality in the moment of its highest expectation and tension towards the new. This tension is discovered in the light of everyday experience. Poetry is innocent of prediction because it is the fulfillment of all the momentous predictions hidden in everyday life. This is its innocence and its dignity. We are not persuaders. Poets are the children of the unknown. We are the ministers of silence. Let us recognize ourselves for who we are, dervishes mad with secret therapeutic love that cannot be bought or sold, and which the politicians fear more than violent revolution. For violence changes nothing, but love changes everything. So in Merton's poetry, the reader can't read the words in terms of their usual meanings. He places words together in ways that decontextualizes the meaning. And the ambiguities in the relationships of the words tends to set some people on edge, as if they're accused of not understanding something that he didn't mean to be understood in the first place. So the reader has to make peace with these poems and accept them, tolerating their unexpected manifestations and not interpreting everything unfamiliar as a threat or trying to make it fit into preconceived meanings. So Merton called his poems ciphers of energy, where the words are programmed with specific meanings, but the poet has a special vocation to be outside those meanings. And these poems awaken possibilities and alter one's perceptions. Merton says these poems invent themselves. He called it fierce modernism and said it was distinguished by convulsive juxtaposition and rejection of lyricism. So I felt like I had to say all this before I read any of his poems because this is how they work. And so here's the first poem that he wrote that he felt really happy with, and he titled it The White Girls. The white girls lift their heads like trees. The black girls go reflected like flamingos in the streets. The white girls sing as shrill as water, and the black girls talk as quiet as clay. The white girls open their arms like clouds, and the black girls close their eyes like wings. Angels bow down like bells, and angels look up like toys. Because the heavenly stars stand in a ring, and all the pieces of the mosaic earth get up and fly away like birds. So Merton said there was nothing in it of sense, and that it cuts through conventional thinking, and he called it concrete and experimental. And he experimented with this kind of poetry throughout his career. But in the last year of his life, he had 3 new books of poetry ready for publication, and he was on fire with poetry. And the first of these books was called Cable to the Aces, and it's his most experimental poetry. He called it anti-poetry and described it as an animated mosaic of irony and experiment. So these poems abandon all the meaning and become language in the face of chaos. And this opens to a strange lucidity that results when the fortuitous juxtaposition of images puts words together in ways that are not normal, and it sparks a creativity that brings forth an intelligence that could not be created by the intellect or the reason. So here's an example from Cable of the Aces. It's called The Harmony of Excesses. The hidden lovers in the soil become green plants and gardens tomorrow when they are ordered to reappear in the wet sun's poem. Then they force the delighted power of buds to laugh louder, and they scatter all the cries of light like shadow rain and make their bed over and over in the hollow fire of violent bonfire. They spin the senses of the mute morning in an abandoned river. Love's wreckage is left on the shore, all around my breathless voice, which on the coasts of larking meadows invented all these children and their mischievous noises. So the lovers teach April stars to rebel, quiet, and follow faithless courses, and it doesn't matter. The seed is not afraid of winter, or the terrible sweetness of the spring's convivial nightmare, or the hot surprise and dizzy spark of their electric promise. For the lovers and the sleeping nerve are the hope and the address where I send you this burning garden, my talkative morning glory, my climbing germ of poems. So the next book that he had ready for publication in 1968 is called The Geography of Logaria, and it was entirely different. And he began to incorporate anthropological and travel reports from far-flung branches of the human tree, and he wanted to hone in to the minute particulars of human nature. And it included an incredible reach of anthropological studies from the cargo cults and the 17th century English ranters and the Mayans and the Shoshones and the Zens and the Sufis. So here's an example of what he called a cargo song, in which it's in the voice of a Polynesian native who was seeing these planes fly overhead, and they knew they were full of exotic goods from faraway places. So this poem goes, Letter to Mr. Klopkot. Sir, you son of a bitch, you notice we have cut down your coconut trees. You have messed with all our women. And when this was pointed out to you, you have not desisted. And now we're going to fix you, Klopkot. 5 men will come, and you will not hear them come, and you will be shot, and parts will be cut off, and parts also eaten, because of which our dead shall rise, black shall be white, cargo shall come to Santo, and ancestors come home in white ship, and from where you sent them, you son of a bitch, with all your papers. So for you, Mr. Klopkot, we sing this message, 5 special delivery bullets in the chest tomorrow. And when our ship will come from America, where there is no more death, repeat, night letter, Mr. Klopkot, sir, you son of a bitch, you notice. Ghost winds have blown down your coconut trees and your beach is very red. So, in that last year of his life, the 3rd book he had ready for publication, but wasn't published until after his death, was called Sensation Time at the Home. So for this poem, imagine Thomas Merton sitting up late at night at his desk in his hermitage, pen in hand, a kerosene lamp casting its yellow glow on the paper as he writes this poem, which was published in his final collection. And it's called The Night of Destiny. In my end is my meaning, says the season. No clock, only the heart's blood, only the word. O tongue of flame under the heart, speak softly, for love is black, says the season. The red and sable letters on the solemn page fill the small circle of seeing. Long dark and the weak life of oil, who holds the homeless light secure in the deep heart's room. Midnight, kissed with flame. See, see, my love is darkness. Only in the void are all ways one. Only in the night are all the lost found. In my ending is my meaning. So, Merton was a mystic, a famous mystic, and his mysticism is inherent in his poetry. And there's a historical marker in downtown Louisville that commemorates a mystical insight that Merton had at that location. And it is, as far as I can tell, the only historical marker in America that commemorates a mystical experience. And Merton recorded the event in one of his journals, and here's his description. In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I was theirs, and that we could not be alien from one another even though we're total strangers. And it was like waking from a dream of separateness, of spurulous self-isolation in a special world And there was no way of telling those people that they're all walking around shining like the sun. So Merton thought of art as a form of mystical experience. He said, the artist's experience at its highest is a natural analog of mystical experience. And in one of his literary essays, he said, the poet is always akin to the mystic. Poets are contemplatives that see the mysteries. End quote. And art illuminates the subjectivity that's common to us all. It's an aesthetic vision that transcends the individual and lets go of everything and finds all in nothing. He called this a secret ladder. He says the contemplative is not separated from life, just the opposite. He calls mystical awareness the crown of life. So to Merton, the artist is the successor to the prophets who were filled with divine fire. And in our time, this role falls to the poets. He says mysticism is an awakening to an impeccable, pure simplicity of one consciousness in all and through all. He was seeking this hidden wholeness that's omnipresent in all things. And in the later years of his life, he recognized the way to this hidden wholeness was not found solely in Christianity, but was shared with other traditions. He saw there were many doors to the non-dual, that the Buddhists used meditation, the Hindus used yoga, and the Sufis used twirling. And all of these are ports of entry to one consciousness in all. And in his life as a poet and artist, he recognized that poetry and all forms of art serve this same end. So he described mystical vision as a pure diamond blazing with invisible light in everybody. And if we could see it, we would see billions of points of light because the gate of heaven is everywhere. And in another place, he talked about mysticism, and he says, there's a basic unity within ourselves at the summit of our being. And it's here at the summit of our being that we discover the dignity of this earthly self in and by itself. There's a place in each of us where we're all the same. And Merton called this esoteric interiority the ace of freedom. He says the great mystery of contemplation is purified by humility and abides in silence. And in one of his later poems, he addressed this. The title of the poem is In Silence. Be still. Listen to the stones of the wall. Be silent. They try to speak your name. Listen to the living walls. Who are you? Who are you? Whose silence are you? In the last few years of his life, Merton got to live in a little cabin in a monastery built for him out in the woods. Merton was looking forward to getting to the cabin as a hermit, and he told everybody in the monastery to leave him alone, that he wanted to be out there by himself. And then at the end of the first week, Merton showed up back at the monastery and was complaining that nobody was paying attention to him. So the cabin is a lovely little place. It's just has a nice front room and a kitchen and a small bedroom and a little chapel. And now the monks use it for retreats, and there are meetings of the Merton Society in the cabin from time to time. And I got to work closely with Brother Paul Quignon, who was Merton's assistant for 10 years. And along with the other poets, Ron Whitehead and Andrew Smith, we met at the cabin and put together a book of poetry called Not Knowing. So there's a palpable sense of literary inspiration in that cabin. It buzzes with energy, and there's a special excitement about being there. And on my last visit to the cabin, the poet Andrew Smith was with me. And on the ride back, we had several of Merton's books with us in the car. And Andrew started opening them at random and pulling out the first phrase he saw. And he'd turn to another page and pull out a different phrase. And when we got back to Tennessee, he gave me the list. And it reads, ruled by selfishness, asleep or dead, I have made the vow to the ultimate idea, detached from the cares of the world, at the corners of human sensibility, drawn into the mystery of the bitter truth about the dust of death. So that's it for mine, and I'll pass it to Brodie.
There's the, do you want to expound that?
Oh, well, that's the inside of the cabin, and that's Merton's desk. And you can see his bookshelf, and it's just a wonderful place to get to go to the cabin. So.
This is not knowing.
And here's the book that we put together, and there's a couple of copies out on the bookshelf, out on the book table.
All right. Thanks,
Okay.
Michael.
Yeah.
So, Brodie, just going over Thomas Merton, the hero's journey of his own life and how he viewed, essentially, we are all our own heroes in our own journeys. So in The Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell writes, a hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. Much like the hero's journey, Thomas Merton embarked on his own spiritual conquest for truth, and in so doing became a bridge between the spiritual and physical world for generations hence, closing the gap between solitary meditation and experiencing life alongside humanity. This monomythic journey can be seen in his own life and was brought to the forefront of his contemplative writings, serving as a roadmap for those of us seeking inner transformation. Highlighting the major steps of the journey, primarily those of departure, initiation, and return, we can see that Merton's decision was followed with pure intention, which grew ever deeper in its awareness and actionability. At the start of most heroes' journeys, they are called to an adventure. And for Merton, the impetus ranges from the tragedy of losing his mom at a young age, to living a transitory childhood, to eventually having a restless soul. It is important to note that Merton was born in France to artistic parents, which proved to benefit him creatively with poetry and cognitively with philosophical works in the future. This was advantageous as it fosters and nurtures imagination. As stated in the Journal of Educational Psychology, children exposed to creative environments from an early age show greater flexibility in thinking and the ability to adapt to new challenges. The process of creating art involves self-reflection and emotional expression. If one is able to understand their own emotions, they are more likely to empathize with others, connecting and understanding diverse perspectives. Now, this proved to be very good soil for young Thomas. And after his father died when Merton was 16, he lived a bohemian lifestyle. And although there was outward success in his education at Columbia University, he felt that inner void, a disconnection. And after encountering Catholicism and reading the works of St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, this call to adventure intensified. And perhaps Merton himself understood what it meant to undergo an initial refusal of the call, a hesitation in which the hero rejects what does not first appear as forward movement, possibly from a sense of duty or obligation, fear, insecurity, or a sense of inadequacy. Perhaps the most common reason for a refusal of the call is fear or a feeling of unworthiness. Merton writes, quote, "We still have a basically superstitious tendency to associate failure with dishonesty and guilt, failure being interpreted as punishment. Even if a man starts out with good intentions, if he fails, we tend to think he was somehow at fault. If he was not guilty, he was at least wrong. We either condemn it with a godlike disdain or forgive it with godlike condescension. We do not accept it with human compassion, humility, and identification. Thus, we never see the one truth that would help us begin to solve our ethical and political problems, which is that we are all more or less wrong, that we are all at fault, all limited, obstructed by our own mixed motives, our self-deception, our greed, our self-righteousness, and our tendency to aggressivity and hypocrisy." End quote. How does Merton say we should approach this place of rejection? Simply put, in acceptance. He was careful to not encourage guilt-ridden thinking that is always too glad to be wrong in everything, as this can result in an invasion of responsibility. This kind of surrender or sacrifice is touched on in his autobiography, The Seven-Story Mountain, where Merton says, quote, "I had to leave the world in order to find it. But I had to leave the world by dying to it. I had to die to myself and become something I could not have imagined. This surrendering to the false self, the ego, is not just a personal experience, but also a process of surrender to God's will. The ego must die for the true self to emerge." End quote. Merton crossed the threshold when he entered the monastery in 1941 of his heroic journey, joining the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky. During this stage of the journey, the hero leaves the known limits of the world and ventures into a realm where the rules and limits are unknown. He would have to give up what he was accustomed to, the abandonment of ego and materialism, for a world of silence, discipline, isolation, once writing, quote, "He who isolates himself in order to enjoy a kind of independence in his egotistic and external self does not find unity at all, for he disintegrates into a multiplicity of conflicting passions and finally ends in confusion and total unreality." And he once said, "Go into the desert not to escape other men, but in order to find them in God." As one might imagine, whether they leave or stay, they may still be wondering whether or not they belong. But in an effort to connect understanding our connection with God and our own identity, he quotes Romans 8:15 through 16, "You did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption, which is acceptance." One of the pitfalls Merton warns against is one of losing integrity. There can be an intense egotism in following everybody else. People are in a hurry to magnify themselves by imitating what is popular, he said. Merton once said, quote, "Every one of us is shadowed by an illusory person, false self. My false self and private self is the one who wants to exist outside the reach of God's will and God's love, outside of reality and outside of life. For one to get out from in front of their own journey, there are necessary sacrifices dependent upon the individual." In Conjectures of a Bystander, Merton writes, quote, "The real and true sacrifice is not a heroic deed. It is not a search for meaning. It is simply the willingness to be forgotten, to live in obscurity." In his autobiography, he states, "I wanted to be a saint, but I had no idea what that meant. And I was not prepared for the suffering that it would come with it." An example of this materialist sacrifice, he talks about television, which, quote, "could become a kind of unnatural surrogate for contemplation," which I've been guilty of myself. A descent to subnatural passivity rather than an ascent to supremely active passivity in understanding and love. And he once said, "The secret of my identity is hidden in the love and mercy of God." And now we go into the transformation part of the journey, in which he says, quote, "Transformation is the sacrifice of the false self is the most difficult and the most necessary of all. To sacrifice the false self, we must be able to face the true self and accept the truth of who we are." And how does one undertake this act of discovery? Well, simply put, contemplation. And how do we do that? Merton suggests we pray for our own discovery. He speaks of a point in which God can be met, quote, "in a real and experimental contact with his infinite actuality." And he also said the creative and mysterious inner self must be delivered from the wasteful, hedonistic, destructive ego that seeks only to cover itself with disguises. End quote. It was in the abyss in which Merton encountered an awakening, moving beyond the confines of religious dogma and a more universal understanding of faith. During this stage in the hero's journey, one faces death. so to speak, and emerges reborn. These revelations came through contemplation, encounters with other religious traditions, such as Zen Buddhism, Sufism, Hinduism. And for Merton, there was a constant thirst for knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. And throughout his acts of pure intention, he did not want to leave any stone unturned. And some of the final steps within the hero's journey include being in the belly of the well, a final separation from the hero's known world, a willingness to undergo a metamorphosis, and a form of self-annihilation which is a result of contemplation. And he says, he once said, contemplation is not ultimately perfect unless it's shared. And this is where Merton serves as that bridge between, the spiritual world and the physical world, of sharing what you know for the betterment of your fellow brethren. In keeping with the hero's journey, this would serve as a movement from personal transformation to service for others. In the return stage of the journey, Merton shared the gift of wisdom he has obtained from his atonement with the Father or the abyss. Once a cloistered monk, Merton, if he had not gone through the journey of doubts, he may have come at it from an angle of egotism. But instead, he became an influential voice on civil rights, nuclear disarmament, global spirituality. And his writings remain a beacon of light for those who similarly struggle with the tensions between solitude and engagement, and faith and doubt, contemplation and action. The hero's journey requires a path of trial, self-discovery, ultimate service to the world. Merton embodied the journey of the seeker, one who heeds the call to the adventure, undergoes profound change, returns to share wisdom with humanity. Not just an outward experience, but an inner awakening, a journey that leads to a deeper connection with the divine and all of humanity. He once said, quote, "It takes heroic humility to be yourself and to be nobody but the man or the artist that God intended you to be." And on individuality, he speaks, "It will not be a matter of mere appearance or opinions or tastes, ways of doing things. It's something deep within the soul." And so he touches a little bit on faith, or a lot on faith. I'll touch a little bit on it because he wrote so much. Faith, he says, quote, "Faith is not just the grim determination to cling to a certain form of words, no matter what may happen. Above all, faith is the opening of an inward eye, the eye of the heart, to be filled with the presence of the divine light." Well, this takes some measure of discipline. And how do we get there? Through the contemplative life. He says, quote, "No contemplative life is possible without aesthetic self-discipline, relying on the mysterious power of God. From then on, our life becomes a series of choices between the fiction of our false self, and we feed with the illusions of passion and selfish appetite, and our loving consent to the purely gratuitous mercy of God," end quote. In understanding oneself, a writer can inject, say if you're a writer, you can inject your own revelations into a character because they come from a place of empathy, where they can comprehend the pitfalls of, a place of purgatory of pride, which, I thought this was a good example of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I think this is a really neat scene in which he starts comparing himself to others, and all of a sudden, Mr. Hyde comes back, and he realizes, oh, I'm not as good as what I thought I was. And so I'll just quote from that book real quick. "It was a fine day. I sat in the sun on a beach, the animal within me licking the chops of memory, the spiritual side a little drowsed, promising subsequent penitence, but not yet moved to begin. After all, I reflected, I was like my neighbors, and then I smiled, comparing myself with other men, comparing my active goodwill with the lazy cruelty of their neglect. And at the very moment of that vainglorious thought, a qualm came over me, a horrid nausea, and the most deadly shuddering. I began to be aware of a change in the temper of my thoughts, a greater boldness, a contempt of danger, a solution of the bonds of obligation. I looked down, My clothes hung formlessly on my shrunken limbs. The hand that lay on my knee was corded and hairy, and I was once more Edward Hyde. So, one of the greater questions here is, which is better, the active life or the interior life? For Merton, it was a mix of both, a healthy mix of both. He does, however, want us to not seek faith and wisdom as an end unto themselves, because true expression of faith is not in passive belief, but in active engagement with the world. The act of doing is seen as a reflection of inner transformation. If inner transformation has truly happened, you can't help but interact with the world and share that. The last stage of the hero's journey includes the freedom to live with bravery. And he talks about praying against cowardice. This is a great excerpt from this book, New Seeds of Contemplation, which I've had most of these quotes from. And he has a chapter on just little paragraphs of prayer. He says, "Untie my hands and deliver my heart from sloth. Set me free from the laziness that goes about disguised as activity, when activity is not required of me, and from the cowardice that does not or does what is not demanded, in order to escape sacrifice." Merton believed us all to be heroes, stating the city of those who love one another is drawn and fused together in the heroism of charity under suffering, while the city of those who hate everything is scattered and dispersed. For Thomas Merton, the hero's journey brings about unity, in which each person who loses the ego is able to find their true self and help others on the journey. Thank you. And I'll pass it on to Jonathan Greene. All right, it's going.
I was going to start with something I remembered the other day, and you can find online. It was just not 10 years ago, September 24th, 2015, that the Pope, same Pope we have now, Pope Francis, talked to Congress. And you can go to the Washington Post and see him talk. And he singled out 4 great Americans during his speech before Congress. Martin Luther King Jr., Abraham Lincoln, and 2 that others didn't know that well, Dorothy Day and Thomas Merton. And I woke to the fact that sort of in 1959, I heard King speak in a church in Harlem, 125th Street in New York, and that I knew both Dorothy Day, who founded the Catholic Worker, and Thomas Merton. And it was somewhat curious. Thomas Merton knew about Dorothy Day. She edited a lot of his essays, but she had never met him. And so one time when I was with Merton, he asked about what she was like in person, which was funny. And Merton was a very hands-on, very, for a monk, you think he's sequestered away Then when I knew him, he was a hermit, that actually he was very involved in what was happening in the world. And a lot of his essays in the end were censored. And some were published under different names. And one particular friend was sort of subterfuging things to him and away from him to get published. And so we can look at today's reality, and you have, for example, the Dalai Lama, who one thinks in some instances the Chinese would like to kill and certainly take away all his power and his place that he has in India. And then they created their own Dalai Lama called a Pancha Lama. And then we think of the situation in Russia and Ukraine. Well, there's the Eastern Orthodox that they follow there, and the Russians have their own patriarch. His name in English would be Cyril, but there it's probably pronounced Kirill or something. And he, if you ever come across him, he's very gung-ho war. He thinks war is wonderful. And the Romanians have their own patrician that has a different Eastern Orthodox church. And Merton spent a lot of time as an activist against the war in Vietnam. Something you would think somebody who's a hermit would not spend his time doing anything. So I came across this recently. It's the day I met Thomas Merton. About probably an hour after this photograph was taken. And I knew three of them. So Merton is on the right, then Jackie Roberts, who's a vocalist, and then the folk singer and composer John Jacob Niles, who's famous for some Christmas songs. And so after he was there, he visited some old friends of his named Victor and Carolyn Hammer, who were close friends of mine. And I stopped paying rent for a parking space where I worked at the university. And every once in a while, on my way home, I would stop by their place. And this time, Thomas Merton happened to be there. And he knew about me for a long time. Part of what I've been doing, preparing for this, is I've been through things that I wasn't aware of before. And one of the things was in 1962, when I met the Hammers, Carolyn Hammer wrote Merton about me, and I know this not because of what she wrote, that doesn't exist anymore, but Thomas Merton wrote the Hammers, "I was glad to get your letter and Carolyn's card about Jonathan Greene. Came at the same time. Thanks to you for both." So I didn't know about this. So he knew about me from way back from 1962. And let's see, the portrait. Yeah, so this is a portrait of Thomas Merton, sort of, to me, an idealized monk that he painted. And it was bought by the son of somebody whose house was one of the most famous houses in America. One of the two most famous places built by Thomas Lloyd Wright. He lived at Falling Water, and his son was an architectural person, and he had this painting, but the painting no longer exists because it was destroyed by a fire. But in another way, he replicated. So I think that still exists. And so yeah, I happened to meet the Hammers in '62 when I was visiting here. And the cliche would say he's a Renaissance man. He was a type designer, a printer, a draftsman, a painter, an architect, a furniture maker, an instrument maker. He built a clavichord, a sculptor, an editor, a philosopher. And he rediscovered the art of the mezzotint. And when Merton saw me that day, he was starting a magazine which became known as Monk's Pond. And he had seen a magazine that I edited. So he immediately decided I should help him with the magazine, and which I did. And there were 4 issues, and here's one example, which actually was, so, I mean, I was in every issue, my writing and my translation, but also work of people I knew and knew about. So, I guess in January of '68, I sent him some pages of translations of Paul Klee, the painter. And Paul Klee also wrote poems and notebooks and journals. And so I enclosed things I'm sending Merton. The Klee page, translated by Hollow and sent to me over a year ago. I had not seen it in print and could write him re-permission. And then, a few days later, well, actually later in that month, he writes, "Dear Jonathan, very many thanks for the good materials. First, Hollow's Klee is just exactly what I want. I would very much like to use it." So that's, and if I can't use what you sent, I might try to dig up some myself from Klee's journals. So that's how part of the instances of how things went. And so I was curious. I was supposed to Anselm Hollow. I don't even know how I met him. He was living on the Isle of Wight in England. He was Finnish. He translated German, Finnish, Russian, etc. So And then, I mean, if he had lived longer, I would have had a lot of other similar people that we knew in common and that he was interested in. He used us, and he used Cameron Hammer, who was a librarian, in a way as research people. He would tell me who he was writing about, and I would find articles about them and send them, because he was sort of isolated where he lived. And then another thing that I was able to find out is things that he wrote in his journal. And one of the things was again, good things yesterday from Ansel Hollow. He was in touch with him directly. Translations of Clay and a poem of its own. Must write Jonathan Greene, Wendell Berry, etc. And one thing that sort of is somewhat humorous in a way. So there are photographs of his hermitage. And in June 13th, 1968, this is an entry in his journals that tickles me. The plumbers finally came, put in the septic tank, connected the water pipes, and I have a working bathroom at last. After shoveling some dirt that had been left, I took a shower and drank shandygraph. For by chance, I had a can of English ginger beer, very expensive, left by Jonathan Greene. The hills were particularly beautiful and green, so that I was there on that big day of the Hermitage getting plumbing. And I never thought of ginger beer as being particularly expensive. But I guess I took a six-pack there because I was on a picnic. And the way I got to spend the longest time with him was Anson Hollow was going to look into a job at U of L, University of Louisville, and he couldn't make it for some reason. And I had no way to, like, just calling Merton up. Though later I found out they did have a phone there. So I just went to tell him that he couldn't come, and I was probably just going to leave. But he said, "Oh no, spend the day." Robert Lax, his friend from Columbia, was there, so it wasn't like he had other things he could do. So we walked in the woods. We shot lots of photographs. I didn't have a camera, but I used Merton's borrowed camera. And later those photographs showed up, and I got, there's some in this book of our correspondence out there, so 1968, when I look somewhat different. And then I got 2 sheets of contact prints, and I was asked if I wanted more, and I did. I marked the ones I wanted. I never saw them again. And now I wonder if they were credited to somebody else. Never know. And as I pointed out, people would probably project that Merton was a very solemn person, but he actually had a very good sense of humor, and that might be shown in this photograph of him playing the bongos. And then as was said, his parents were artists, and he hardly got to know his mother at all. his father, I think, died when he was 15. And then late in life, Merton tried art. And here's a sample of his art. And for some reason, I was told or asked to review this book on his art by RLSV called Angelic Mistakes. And this is a sample. So this is sort of what Michael said about poetry having meaning. This is, Merton calls these collaborations with solitude. And he doesn't actually want you to. So this, I think, at times I think if you want to project meaning, this could be somebody running. And you can see maybe running figures in it. But he doesn't want you to project what's happening there. One who makes such nondescript marks as these is conscious of special vocation to be inconsequent. He said basically in different places in this book, he points out that he doesn't want you to see what's there as figures that you know what's there. And I think I'll close. He liked one poet in particular. Oh, well, no, I should. I'll read these two poems. Of this poet that he thinks very highly of. Merton calls Cesar Vallejo, this Peruvian poet, the greatest universal poet since Dante. He was born in the high Andes of Peru, and he ended up in Paris, penniless, homeless, and not having had enough food. So he projects how he's going to die, and it turns out he died on Good Friday. And this poem, he keeps saying he's going to die on Thursday. So he dies the next day. Black stone on top of the white stone. I shall die in Paris in a rainstorm, on a day I already remember. I shall die in Paris, it does not bother me. Doubtless on a Thursday, like today, in autumn. I shall die in Paris because today, Thursday, as I put down these lines, I have set my shoulders to the evil. Never like today have I turned and headed my whole journey to the ways where I am alone. Cesar Vallejo is dead. They struck him, all of them, though he did nothing to them. They hit him hard with a stick, and hard also with the end of a rope. Witnesses are the Thursdays, the shoulder bones, the loneliness, the rain, and the roads. And then I'll end with this. Masses. The battle over. The soldier dead. One came forward, implored him, don't die, I love you so. But the corpse sad as it was, went on dying. Then another joined him, and both of them begged, "Come back to us, brother, do not leave us forever." But the corpse did not know how to stop his dying. Then 20 others joined him. Then 100, 1,000, 500,000, now shouting, "So much love! Can't we defeat this enemy, death?" But the corpse, as before, kept on dying. Then millions came forth, a choir crying, "Come back to us, don't leave us forever." But the corpse could only do as before and kept dying. Then, when all those left on earth gathered with everyone else, the corpse slowly looked up, deeply moved, began to sit up, put his arms around those closest, started to walk. Thank you. So that was my version. The earlier one was translated by Merton.
So we've got a few minutes for some questions. Anybody have any?
There are no questions, but at the same time that this is going on, I had tickets to home up and went back to remember the mission at New York going on, and I mistook that it was Sunday. I'm so glad that I made that mistake. I just am very grateful for the inspiration and experience and the perspectives. No question.
Yeah.
I have any other questions.
I'm really embarrassed to say I did not know that Alice Merton was born. I just always assumed he was spiritual way. How do you see the development in the world today?
Well, it's very easy. It's his world and a lot of people's world is full of empathy. I mean, the current president thinks empathy is a sissy thing and doesn't like empathy and empathetic people like our former president, who just retired, and his wife wore on her jacket, "Don't care," on the back of her jacket. So it's quite, I think Merton would have hated this change.
Well, I think in today's world, people are so glued to their phones, and they feel like they're being productive, but they're really not, and the importance of solitude, being able to sit by yourself and enter that contemplation, prayer, journaling. I think that's something that's missing, or has been missing for quite some time. Actually, I saw the other day there's a trend for physical copy journals for people to start journaling in. I don't know, it's like a new thing right now, so that's good. Yeah.
Other questions?
Well, I'll tell one last story about being at the Hermitage. It's just a delight to get to go up there. And I got to meet Brother Paul, who was Merton's assistant for many, many years. And Brother Paul ran the tape recorders when Merton was giving his lectures. So we went out to the cabin, and there was a few of us there. And he took me over to the bookshelf on one side, and here was a big row of all of Thomas Merton's journals. And he said, "All right, Michael, stand here, close your eyes, and grab one of these books." And so I reached up and grabbed the book and pulled it out. And this was like say March 15th of last year, and he opened up that journal to March 15th, 1958, which was that year of the journal, and he read to us what Thomas Merton was recording about that day in March in 1958. And he called that Merton Roulette. So that's a real trick. If you ever get to visit there and have Brother Paul, he'll play Merton Roulette with you. Well, thank you all for coming, and it was a delight to be here.